Hello and welcome. The last time Tammy Kling joined me, we barely scratched the surface. Tammy is the founder of Voices Speakers Bureau, the force behind On Fire Books, and the creator of The Conversation, which is an invite-only room where some of the most accomplished people in the world show up without titles, without name tags, and without the usual noise that follows influence. Tammy's work centers around one main thing, and that's that words are currency. When Tammy speaks about voice, leadership, and legacy, it comes from a lifetime spent building leaders and holding space for conversations most people never have. There's more to explore, and today we're going to continue where we left off. So help me welcome back Tammy. Good morning.
Good morning, Tanya. Thanks for having me. As always, you have such a strong voice in the podcast universe, and I'm honored to be here.
I appreciate that. And if people are trying to figure out where to watch this as well, I'm going to drop a comment that they can find it also on YouTube and Facebook. And of course, I tagged your whole life before we started.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Wonderful.
Yeah. So let's jump right in. We were on literally question 4. Okay. Just as a recap for the people who weren't with us for part 1, I'd say go back and watch it. 2, some of the highlights. We talked a lot about words and speaking life into people, and how whether somebody's sitting in a high-rise corner office or they are without a house and living homeless, they share the same wounds. And Tammy's path in life has led her to understand the weight of her words. She's been an author, she's a ghostwriter, she's done the things, she won't tell you that. She's been on national broadcast television shows. She's not going to tell you that because none of that matters. What she cares about is building people. So I'm going to jump into number 4 because what I promised at the end of the last one, Tammy, when we fell off, is that we would pick up where we left off. Because people were like, oh, no. I was like, she'll be back. Okay. So in your experience, what do words make possible when they're spoken with intention? And what do they cost when they are withheld or misused?
Oh, I think even those of us in the words business, right? Even those of us who like you're a podcaster and you do so many things in business and sales and leadership, and I'm in the business of words and publishing and prepping speakers for TEDx or whatever stage. We are, even as intentional as we can be, it's pretty easy not to say the right words, right? We all kind of withhold words sometimes because you have all these thoughts going on in your head. And I think that really the power of words is being bold and courageous enough to be able to say the words in your head. And sometimes it's really hard for me. I remember when my kids were young, I taped something to my bathroom mirror and it said 14 hugs a day and words of affirmation. So I was reminding myself, why do I have to remind myself to give my kids words of affirmation? Because I think sometimes we think, oh gosh, I love you, or oh gosh, Tanya is so brilliant. But I've never said that probably to you. I've probably never said, oh, Tanya, you're so brilliant, because we think all these thoughts in our head and we just naturally don't communicate them.
Right. Yeah. Clearly you helped with the little business development book that I had written. And my favorite F word is filter, but it's not filter for what you're talking about, right? You're talking about words of affirmation. When you think about the tear down, the places where people don't take the opportunity when they should, right? It's not coming from a positive place. And all the wounds. I mean, when I think about the number of people you've written their books, right? Their life journey. And it was nearly always words that caused them to kind of bring their own value down from someone else that they cared about, that I guess they thought didn't care as much about them.
Yes, yes, you're right. And I mean, I think that, the omission of words, if I could encourage anyone today to do a kind of a life audit on yourself, just take one blank sheet of paper and write where have I omitted words? Meaning, look at all your critical relationships, maybe even clients, and look at where have I omitted words where perhaps I've thought something that I never verbally communicated. And you're right about people who were raised with a lot of maybe emotional abuse, physical abuse, or even just a sarcastic adult
Very.
around them. I mean, that's can be very, very demeaning.
Yeah.
Sarcasm is hatred's ugly cousin. I always say, you
Ooh, I
know,
like that.
people think that sarcasm is funny, and in some parts of the world, like where I grew up, New York, the northern parts of the world, Connecticut, Philadelphia, sarcasm is kind of like its own language of that part of the country. But I know that I've been around people in my own life where I've seen them be sarcastic towards someone. And although it's uncomfortable, I always interject
Yeah.
if it's something painful or demeaning. So if someone says, "Oh, John, yeah, you think you know it all. Ha ha ha. That's just because you're the CEO, but look, you were a C student." Like people try to use sarcasm to take people down a notch.
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't even realize they're doing it, and you have to course correct them. Recently, I was talking with a CEO, and this really showed the power of words. This was simply as a Vistage Chair, listening in my one-on-one to a very accomplished leader of a company with over 11,000 employees. And he said simply this, he said, at the end of it, "No one has ever asked me to share my story before."
Oh,
Isn't that crazy? So
that-
that shows you, and I find that often, especially with men, because women, we share our stories with each other. We share our stories. We'll sit around on the couch and share our stories. When men are together, they're generally doing an activity, whether it's golf or
yeah.
whatever, so a sporting event. But women, we talk and share, right? And the power of words is if I just ask you your story, that's one way we can stop talking about ourselves and just ask someone, "So tell me about you."
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the thought that was coming to mind when people, notice I always say, tell me, tell everyone about who you like, tell them about you. What people lead with is always interesting, right? Because that tends to be what they anchor their identity in.
Mhm.
When you're talking about sarcasm, and I think about, the decades I spent coaching and trying to develop leaders, that was one of the hardest things to coach out of people because they thought they were being funny and right and using sarcasm at the audience. And the only way I finally would get it to peel back, because I said, look, if you think you need to be funny in order to connect, then that joke needs to be on you, never, ever the other person. So,
That is amazing coaching. That's amazing coaching. You bring up a good point also, because I'm always coaching speakers and I try to tell them, don't try to get up there on stage and be sarcastic or funny unless you're a comedian. If
right.
you're a paid comedian, fine.
Yeah.
But I have seen speakers get up and say things like, "Oh, hey, Texas, how are you? Boy, I see all the men in the room. I guess you guys don't care about women's rights." Or even silly things like the weather. "Oh, it's 100 degrees here. I hope the Dallas Cowboys don't lose." Like they
Yeah.
stand up trying to be funny and unintentionally immediately isolate themselves, distance themselves from the audience because they
Yeah.
insult the audience. I have heard that is probably the number one mistake I see. In order to alleviate their own discomfort, they're
Hmm.
trying to tell a joke or be sarcastic. I always say, don't do that unless you're a comedian and you're
Right.
paid to be a comedian. And sarcasm really is, it really is intended to kind of wound people because you're saying the opposite of something. And
Yeah.
sarcasm hurts people. And also, if you're talking to a D on the DISC leadership scale, for instance, if you're a salesperson and you have corporate accounts and you deal with a C-level or any kind of leadership, you don't know if they're a D, and Ds are very black and white.
Yeah.
I'm a D, you're a D. And if someone says to something sarcastic, sometimes even though I get it, sometimes I'll just say, I don't get it. Especially if it's a joke that's directed to harm someone, like
Yeah.
one of their subordinates or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the only way, because I couldn't get it out of them, right? I could not get them to stop doing it. So that became the anchor. If that's just who you are, then it needs to be pointed at yourself,
Yes,
never
I
someone
love
else.
that. I love that.
Speaking of, and that's authenticity, when you're talking about people, don't be funny, right?
Mhm.
If you're not funny, if you try to be funny and you're not funny, it's odd,
Yeah.
right? If you're trying to be nurturing and you're not nurturing, it's odd.
Yeah. Just be yourself. Right.
Right.
Be
Just
yourself.
show up with who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, too funny. Okay, let's see. Let's go to because I want to make sure I get the questions answered. They're so good, and you help so many. Not that my questions are good, but it helps us take you somewhere where we get to tap into
I'll try
that.
to keep them shorter. The answer's
No,
brief.
please. No, we were good last time. Let's see here. You've spent decades elevating other voices through stages, books, and platforms. What do people most often underestimate about the power of words they already carry?
People underestimate how a word, a sentence, literally right now, today, can change and shift someone's DNA. And I don't mean scientifically DNA, but their whole trajectory. So just doing this podcast, I'm reminded to right afterwards today to go ahead and don't make my day and my activities a priority, but speak positive words into the people closest to me, my clients, my friends, my loved ones, my family. I mean, even in my proximity, because sometimes we go through the day, we do speak positive words to strangers
Mhm.
often, but sometimes we don't say, we encounter strangers, oh, thank you, and we try to brighten their day, right? But we don't always remember to do that. And it can shift someone's entire day. I would encourage people to really call out someone's gifts. So for instance, anytime I'm a Vistage Chair in Dallas, I have a group of leaders, and anytime I'm doing a one-on-one, I mean, you don't become a CEO of a billion-dollar company without having gifts,
Sure.
but you're so in the weeds and working your daily life that sometimes you forget what other people see in you, right? And to call out their gifts, I always authentically call out their gifts, not complimenting people, but saying, gosh, hey, leader, I mean, you were meant for this. Yesterday,
Right.
one of my leaders had a big meeting. I said, look, you got this. You are the head. You're not the tail. You're confident. You're strong. You're energetic. You've got this. You were built for this. Sometimes just
Yeah.
encouraging the truth and showing them what they haven't been able to see. Because sometimes people get beaten down by life. I mean, they're going through, everyone, is going through something. And even if you're having the best life right now, I mean, sometimes there are days where life feels like a battle, right?
Sure. Yeah. That takes me to where superpowers, right? The hardest thing for us as humans to recognize are our own superpowers, because they almost come so naturally, we think everyone else has them.
Mm.
So you doing that and taking that opportunity, very likely you might have actually given him some of his superpowers that he didn't realize were actually superpowers, right?
I love that.
Yeah, just that happens so much.
That's a great way to put it. It is a great way to put it. And I love it. He actually texted me after the call. It was a huge meeting that he had. And he texted me and he said, I went on to the next level. I had this success.
Love it.
So it was really very encouraging to see. But I would like to do more of it, even though this is what I talk about. Words are currency. I don't think I do it enough. I think even if you ask my family, they're more likely to get a letter from me than a conversation, I think, because, you know, you don't communicate your gratitude or communicate their gifts often. Even I have to be more intentional to do it more often and be more consistent.
Well, and you also have to give yourself some grace, because I've not ever been in a room with you where you weren't pouring into other people. So, that's service and leadership, right? Those are gifts. Not everybody has them.
Mhm.
And you definitely do it. So give yourself some grace too.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
because your boys would not have turned out the way they did if they weren't showered with love and
Yes.
leadership and,
Mhm.
decision making and all those. See, this is the problem with having a friend on the podcast, because can completely get down a rabbit hole where I'm just, because,
Yeah.
clearly I want to build you up too, for sure.
Well, you make everyone your friend. So even someone that was a client or an investor, somebody that met you for the very first time in your business, you make everyone feel like they're a friend with your warmth. So, that's a big gift that you have.
I appreciate that. I'm in Denver, right? You're in a hotel. I'm in a hotel right now. Clearly, this is not normal backgrounds, and here to serve. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Mhm.
All right, let's go to the next one. You've built spaces where titles fall away and presence matters. Oh, I got to make this bigger. This is what happens when I don't have a second screen. I'm going to start over. That way you've built spaces where titles fall away and presence matters more than position. That came to life in the conversation, which of course, for those watching, that's an invite only gathering that is not networking. And I'll let Tammy tell you about that.
Mhm.
One, what led you to create it? And why do you believe it's become such a powerful container for reflection and transformation?
Well, I created the conversation, and you know this because you're a leader there. You facilitate one of the conversation circles every year. And I created it after 15 years of working with CEOs. And during that time, I had one CEO in a high rise, CEO of a healthcare company. He was showing me these shoes that just came, literally, he said, they're $5,000 shoes. And then he sat down, he goes, you want to go to lunch? We'll take the Lambo. I mean, he was just real, like, excited about his wealth. And then he burst into tears. He burst into tears. We were writing his book, and I said, tell me about your dad. And his dad had actually gone to prison for being a pedophile, and he had punched his dad in the face. He wrote about this in the book. So this isn't, I would
Yeah.
never tell any secrets. This is
Right.
public knowledge. He wrote about this. And he had that father wound. And after interviewing, even CEOs, I mean, this guy was, very wealthy, even interviewing CEOs with great backgrounds, right? There's always this, not always, but there were so many wounds that nobody had addressed. So, of course, my own background with my father committing suicide, I'm sure is a big fuel and driver for that. And I wanted to create a place where someone could show up, sit in a circle around a campfire
Yeah.
or in an elegant space. We had it in a forest for the first several years. Now we have it where it's in an elegant space. Always there's a circle that we rotate to different circles. And I wanted to make sure that someone could show up, tell what's ever on their heart or mind, and that we facilitated a conversation where they really didn't know anyone. They're not going, this isn't like a band of brothers or anyone at the office that knows you. If you go to the conversation, you're probably going to be in a conversation circle with a billionaire, a homeless guy, and regular executives or people, regular
Right.
humans, we've had people that have started hunger organizations. We've had pastors, we've had CEOs, but we don't allow anyone to wear a name tag because we don't want anyone Googling, researching your title, looking you up on ChatGPT. We don't want anyone looking you up and then trying to contact people just because they want a connection.
Right.
It really is about the whole human. And did you facilitate blind spots or distraction?
I've done both. So over the years, you've had me at blind spots quite a few times, and then distraction was a big one. I think that was in Frisco.
Yeah, so distraction, when you take something like distraction and the facilitator starts, and the guru is you, is what we say, meaning there's no speaker on stage
Yeah.
talking at you. We have these igniters, we call them, which
Right.
igniters that facilitate the conversation and then sit back and let people meditate on it and think about what they want to say. So
Mhm.
distraction can lead to destruction.
Oh,
One simple concept that we start out with.
yeah.
But they don't teach you that in business school. We're taught to make a business plan. We're taught how to sell, business development, right? But we're not taught to do a life audit and look at our day and say, okay, when I go wind down after my meeting, which I like to do, as a neurodivergent, I like to take time to wind down. I can't go from task to task like most people. I have to wind down. But if I'm scrolling and my wind down ends up to be 3 hours, I may not even know that that distraction
Yeah.
has taken me away from my whole purpose for the day, whether it's cooking dinner for family or loved ones, or
Yeah.
whether it's a project, right? And so I love when you facilitate that. You're a great facilitator, by the way. I
Oh,
mean, you've been paid thousands upon thousands of dollars to facilitate. I know because I brought you in to major organizations after merger and acquisitions,
yeah.
and
Thank you.
you're just the right amount of confrontation, not confrontation, carefrontation, to facilitate, which is exactly what you need for leading leaders. Because if you're
Yeah.
at the conversation, you're in the 1% and you're a leader. You're leading leaders. So distraction is something that we don't talk about in the boardroom or anywhere really. So that's why I think it's so powerful. Same thing with blind spots.
Hmm. Blind spots, I think, similarly to superpowers, probably, looking back just in my own journey, one of the hardest things to identify. So, and it becomes, it's a blind spot for a reason. And then I had to lean into the people around me to sort of figure it out. What would you
Well,
tell people as far as figuring out? See, this is how we go off the cuff. What if somebody says, I don't know what my blind spots are?
mhm.
How would you recommend they go about trying to uncover
That's a
that for themselves?
that's a great question, because I did have a leader who had not been to the conversation say to me, well, it's a blind spot because we can't see it. I don't like the idea of asking people, what's my blind spot? You can, but you might that's like asking the uncle that you haven't seen in 10 years, what's my blind spot? Because he might tell you something that he's just been waiting all this time. Oh, you think you're better than everybody. You drive a Mercedes, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Blind spots is a
Yeah.
very, very high level concept.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that we only really truly get through self-discovery. I'll give you an example. Sometimes we discover our blind spots out of a failure. I've had that where I took the kids on a hike in Colorado. I was so worried about bears that I carried a gun on me. I'm not a gun person. I was afraid I was going to trip and shoot myself. I had a gun on me and I had bear spray, and I was so worried about bears on this 14er because I knew we were going to be out like 8 hours. Well, on the way up, on the hiking trail, somebody said, oh yeah, I saw you at the tire shop. You need to get that tire fixed. Went on the hike, came back down, drove the car another 2 weeks, got in a wreck, almost killed ourselves on a mountain by going off a cliff because of my tire. Okay. I didn't have snow tires, but I had a blind spot. Sometimes you're so focused on the bear, right?
Oh, yes.
That you're not focused on other things, even if it's neglecting your health, especially leaders. I had a leader tell me the other day, I'm healthy, I'm fit. I said, no, you're not healthy and fit. What are you talking about? I'm healthy. I said, you just told me that you can't sleep at night because your doctor told you 3 days ago that there's a problem with your blood. So stop saying you're healthy and fit and fix the problem. And this is someone, we got through it, right? But
Sure.
sometimes we have these blind spots like, oh, I was an athlete, I was a runner 10 years ago, but I haven't done anything in 2 months, right? You know, a blind spot is something that can get you killed, basically. And it's the reason I like talking about it, the conversation, is generally I don't discover my blind spots. I listen to that circle.
Yeah.
I listen to what everyone says about their blind spots, and then it'll be 3 days later when I'm going about my daily business. I may be driving, have a literal blind spot on the highway in my car, and something might pop into my head.
Yeah. Wow. By the way, I remember when that happened with your tire. There was no edge rim for the vehicle. That was crazy.
And it was on the ice, right? And what I
Yeah.
should have done is had snow tires on a Hummer, but I was a Texan driving my Hummer to Colorado. But that specific day, you know, it was only in retrospect that I saw that the guy that owned the tire shop on the trail in my mind. I didn't even think about what he said that day because I was so afraid of the bear, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you're so focused on the bear, whether it's a big deal, a big project, that we're neglecting something else over here, you know? I mean, I don't want to get too deep, but it could be as simple as someone neglecting their spouse because they're so focused on a deal that's going to change their family and change their life. And maybe he or she is so focused on this deal that they haven't looked their wife in the eyes in 6 months. They haven't made it home for family dinner because they're thinking, I'm gonna do this deal and make us rich, and then I can travel with my spouse. Or I don't know. Sometimes we're too focused on the bear, and we just have to step back and say, what blind spot do I have? What is my blind spot? Again, I don't like the idea of asking other people
Sure.
about your blind spots because I think sometimes it's our internal habits and other people may not even know what that is, how you're spending your day, right? Because I might look really successful if people look at me from the outside, but they don't know that I probably scroll reels at 3 a.m. until 5 a.m. or that my brain's constantly going and I haven't figured out how to, yeah, that's a blind spot. You know, if you're running on sleep or you're spending too much time online.
Yeah. You've given a couple examples, but it is such an important aspect. We are going to continue to diverge here for a second. So you were talking about being so distracted by a bear that somebody told you you're tired, and then that was a blind spot. You're talking about in wind down time, right? It taking from your time, kind of distractions. And without, you don't have to, certainly, we're not talking about any particular people.
Mhm.
What are some blind spots, patterns that you've heard over the years that maybe could be some that other people deal with just because it's such a new concept for a lot of people, Tammy? I don't think they don't know what they don't know.
Yes. A lot of people have blind spots about their habits. For instance, they'll think they're really successful because of their bank account, but then they realize when they start hearing how other people live, this concept of a morning routine is something that a lot of people, even at a high level, don't know or aren't aware of, you know. So I used to have a process where I would not have one meeting before 11 a.m. I still do that, but I used to be super structured for 15 years, no meetings before 11 a.m. because that was my morning routine,
Right.
reading, workout, all of that. And sometimes it involved other people like the kids, right?
Right.
So I was very structured about that, but I only heard about a morning routine after working with leaders who poured into me, right? And so
Yeah.
sometimes people have a blind spot about what constitutes controlling the controllables in their life. The most frequent blind spot is how do I control the controllables and get balance? So everyone's seeking more balance and less burnout, and they
Right.
don't even have a daily routine. In other words, People might say, I work out every day. And if I ask, well, what time do you work out? Oh, I don't know. Maybe at 6 after work today. Okay, this just happened, by the way. I
Yeah.
just asked somebody, you want to be a bodybuilder. When are you going to work out today? Oh, I don't know, anytime. Okay, well, if you really want to be a bodybuilder, if that's your goal and you want to be in a show, then you have to control the controllables, right? And you have to have a morning routine where you're working out at a certain time. That's just an example. But I mean,
It's a great example though, right? I mean, life gets lifing. Busyness is not business. And they don't have control of their calendars. The morning routine, and maybe just because being in leadership a really long time, right? Similar to you didn't just find out about it, but that morning routine kind of sets the tone. Sort of that one video that I think he was a retired Navy guy, right? About start your day
make your
with making
bed.
your bed. Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's something you can control that creates a structure and kind of puts you in a direction.
Now, that's a perfect example for any leader or even any speaker or any human. That one video went viral, not because people like to make their bed, because in 30 seconds, he was able to say, if you make your bed, that's one thing you can control about your entire day. And it will then, from there, you can rise up and do other things. It's every morning I will turn on my phone and I'll see that you yourself are reading. You're reading, it'll pop up and show me, and I'll be like, oh, wow, Tanya's up at 7 a.m. reading or 6 a.m. reading. And it'll remind me to read. But guess what? I should already do that. People set goals but don't link a time attachment to it,
Yeah.
right? That's the missing link there, that we really need to link a time attachment on our calendar.
Yeah. I've got a mentor and also a friend, if you will, that preaches calendar control, right? And he spent over $100,000 to work with this person for 12 months to teach him how to master his calendar. But then here's the other piece that people miss that he shared was you have to put the green space in. Like when you need to wind down, right? You have to create in your calendar. If you really have calendar control, you also have the breaks in there. That way you can recharge.
Yes,
I
yes,
am
and
not master my
time to
calendar, but I'm
think.
much better than I used to be.
Yes, and I think if everyone did that, he makes a good point. If everyone just for 6 months even lived their life just by the calendar,
Yeah,
I mean, by the calendar, but like you said, not just a lot of us live by our calendar where maybe we're looking at okay, what meetings do I have, right?
right.
But the reason it goes off the rails and we feel unbalanced is when you don't schedule your thinking time, because you need time to think.
Yes,
I mean, if you're creating anything, you have to think. You don't just create. You
right.
think, right? So when do you have time to think? We need that time to work out. We need that time to make food for whoever, yourself or others. That's where it kind of gets imbalanced, is because we're not calendaring it.
Yeah. Probably the biggest distraction for me back when we were learning blind spots was my phone. Right. I felt this need that if my phone rang or somebody texted me, I need to be able to respond to them almost immediately,
Mhm.
which led to figuring out that as a human, a grown ass woman, excuse my French, lacked boundaries. I lacked boundaries. And for reasons, of course, it ended up in the TEDx talk. At the end of the day, though, it was a blind spot.
Yeah.
Uh, and knowing that some people can see their phones and never be distracted, right? Like it's
Mhm.
just, they see it, put it down. But I read an article one time that humans touch their phones every 90 seconds. Well, right. And talk about distraction. I turned the ringer off on my phone in 2018 and I have
Mhm.
not turned it back on.
Yes, and unless you're a real estate agent, because, okay, there's exceptions,
Sure, of course.
but I haven't had my ringer on for at least a decade. And if you look, I don't know if you can see, but, well, I have 297 unheard voicemails. Now,
Yeah.
that's not the way to be either, okay? But I definitely have mastered peace, okay?
Yeah.
297. Now, I'm guessing that 200 of those are solicitors, or I would have listened to them already, right? Because you do have some visual on it.
Right.
And the same thing with email. We can control our piece. I think that realization for you probably enhanced your relationships
Oh, yeah.
more than it gave you time back. Because I don't answer my phone either unless it's like someone, really in my inner circle, like
Right.
family, and I think that really, really helps give you strength in your relationship, like with your loved ones. I mean, when you're sitting with your spouse and you're having dinner, you're not answering your phone. That's a win
Right.
for him. That's a big win for him.
Yeah. Such a good point. And for anybody watching, if you're thinking, oh, I couldn't do that because then my kids couldn't reach me, you can set on your phone, if you set on the do not disturb, that you literally can pick people that can get through regardless if your phone is on silent. So
Yes.
when somebody at that point says, well, like, just say you don't want to do it, it's totally fine. But if
Yes.
you're constantly on your phone, what's
Yes.
not getting done, or who are you not spending time with?
And it does impact relationships. It
Yes.
really does. And, but some people can't let go of it. It's just a phenomenon. Yeah.
Yeah. Tough
Hmm.
one too.
Yeah.
Okay. We ready? We're going to go to the next one. You've
Okay.
witnessed some of the most accomplished and influential people in the world show up in that space with humility, talking about the conversation. What does that reveal to you about blind spots, legacy, and the hunger for honest conversation?
I think when you're starting out in life, let's say someone's in their 20s and they really want to achieve material success, they may get a new car, and then once you have a lot of material things, you do reach a point where it's really not a function of aging. It's a function of, you could look at a 25-year-old who gets it
Right.
because they've had material things and they realize, oh gosh, what now? And I remember when I reached that point of, I have everything I could ever want. I could go on any vacation tomorrow. What now? And it almost leaves this, gosh, like, what's my legacy, right? And so the goal of the conversation is, what's your legacy?
Yeah.
If you go around the room and you ask 20 people in a boardroom, you ask them, or anywhere, what's your legacy? Even speaking on stage, I've asked that question. Women always raise their hand and they say, my children are my legacy. And I challenge that and I say, well, guess what? Just like I'm challenging your listeners today,
Yeah.
is I world schooled my kids. I moved to college when my kid went to college. I love my kids. I'm hands on. I'm not, I'm hands on, right? A ride or die, just like most parents. But your legacy is not your children, because here's why. Your children have their own legacy. When they grow up, they're going to have their own legacy.
Yeah.
So your legacy is something that you put in momentum that will continue long after you're gone. And a CEO yesterday said, he was talking about a children's organization overseas that he helped create that will continue on with momentum after he's gone. And I pointed out, yes, that's a perfect example. However, it doesn't even have to be tangible, right? Your legacy could be in your words and what you've created. Sometimes an author will write a book and that will be their legacy that is there forever,
Yeah.
has thoughts, leadership tips, things that nobody even knows about them.
Right.
And your legacy lives on forever, but really people don't know what their calling is. Sometimes someone's, you've been in those circles confidentially. I won't even
Right.
mention the situation where a billionaire had called me the night before and said, I really need to come to the conversation. Can I come? And I said, absolutely, absolutely. He came and broke down and talked about a very personal problem that was impacting his legacy.
Yeah.
So I think it's not just when we're lost or at a crossroads. I think legacy is it, that's your calling and your purpose. What's your purpose here on earth? Like, what's your
Right.
God-given purpose? What's your calling? And then everything stems from that. There's a lot of times that I'm pouring into someone or working on their speech, TED Talk, coaching a leader, right? That I feel sad because they tell me their story of childhood abuse, or they tell me some story that just makes me so sad. So personally, I could question myself after that day because I'm drained and I'm sad, right? And I'm thinking, is this the work I'm supposed to do? It is, because my calling is to equip world changers, right?
Right.
To help them solve a major life problem. And then maybe I'm not even in their life anymore, right? And so I think whatever you do, if you do it from that purpose and calling, I'm not going to know how my legacy impacts other people. I won't. But
Right.
that leader that solved that problem, his great grandchildren might be impacted by his decisions, right? So it's a process of multiplication no matter what you're doing in life.
Yeah, so the founders, one of the creators of Delphi, which is basically it's an AI. It doesn't go into the internet, but you upload all the intellectual property of somebody, right? Their socials, you name it, anything that's out in the world, and it recreates that person. He did it because I think his grandfather passed when he was really young. His grandfather had written a book, and as an adult, he's like, I wonder what my grandfather would say. Like, what would his wisdom be on this? Tammy, he recreated him in an AI based on the
That
intellectual
is,
property of the
that's
books.
cool.
Right. And then could have the conversation. Now, is it his grandfather? No. But because we write typically how we think, right? And whether our values come out in that, our beliefs come out in that, may not say this is what I believe, but we write like our thoughts. I'm not saying that some people it can't be more structured, but at the end of the day, he was able to recreate that conversation that he wasn't going to ever be able to have.
Yes, yes. And that, I'm going to go research that. That's something I'd want to be involved in. That's incredible. And see, that right there is, it's just so interesting when, we're most impacted as humans, whether you're a CEO or whether you're staying at home with the kids, no matter who you are, an
Yeah.
executive, an investor, an entrepreneur, we're all so impacted by these things at the bottom of the ocean, under the iceberg,
Yeah.
that people can't see, right? Even if you're talking with someone maybe in a meeting or as a leader and they become offended, right? And you're thinking, what did I say? What did I say that was so offensive? But it might be something from years ago that they haven't yet dealt with, where they're being reactive, right?
Yes.
And I think that, like, when we think about our grandfathers, the way we were born, our parents, those all those traumas and victories, all of those are part of our conversations every day in meetings even.
Yeah.
So I always try to think of that little child. And by the way, I know we're not talking about this, but I want to tell all of your listeners to please go watch Tanya's TED Talk, because it's life changing and we all know someone who needs to see it. So don't just watch it, share it with someone that you know who needs to see it.
That was
I
like the toughest,
digress.
that was the toughest thing in the world to, you know, 7 minutes, right? But that was really honestly the toughest thing because human nature, when we as humans recall a positive memory, we see it out in front of us like a picture.
Yeah.
But when we recall something negative or traumatic, we subconsciously step back in emotionally, right? Yeah, it's crazy stuff.
We
So
do, we do. And even watching a movie at the theater can trigger a negative emotion and trigger back to a childhood
yeah,
trauma. But the most courageous people in the world are people who share instead of hide their traumas, I would say I'm in the hide category. I don't want to relive something because I know how it's going to affect me, right? But
Right.
it's very courageous. It's a whole different set of individual 1% of the world that can share their childhood trauma on stage and know that it's going to have this multiplication effect and change lives. And I will say, I was in that judging room in the TEDx conference room with all our judges. That is the only talk that made people cry. The only talk.
Because people in the room would have been affected by the same thing, right? I mean, that's the reality.
Well, yes, and I looked over at one of our judges and I said, I have not experienced what she's experienced, but I know you have. And
Yeah.
she was crying and I said, but this made me cry. And that's how I know in this audition that this person is our speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, believe me, I was very much Jonah when the Lord put that on my heart. I was like, no,
Mm,
no, no, we're going to talk about communication. We're not doing that. But yes.
yeah.
Oh gosh, we could talk for hours, Tammy. We just have to catch up in the same city at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Next one. Long before it was common, you chose to, oh, we already talked about world schooling, but for the people who are tuning in now that didn't tune in on part one, let's give them a kind of a summary again. Long before it was common, you chose to raise and educate your sons through world schooling, immersing them in culture, context, and lived experience. What did that season teach you about leadership and learning that still informs your work today?
I wish parents knew that they aren't, there's a big debate. Don't be their friend, be their parent. Okay. I vehemently disagree with that. You can be both
Yeah,
because you are both as a leader. So at work, if someone comes to you and you're the leader of a couple of colleagues, individuals, and they come to you with a problem, right? Oftentimes you're going to lunch, you're helping them solve the problem, you're going on business trips, you're seeing them at dinner, you're talking about each other's outfits, you become friends. You are a leader. You can confront them when necessary, correct them. You can listen to their problems and help them through it. But when it comes to kids, parents often say, I'm not their friend. I'm not their friend. I'm their parent. Well, if you're going to put a stake in the ground and say, I'm not their friend, okay?
yeah,
Then when they're offered drugs or when they're 16 and she's, thinking about doing something you wouldn't want them to do,
right.
then why would they come to you if you're not their friend? And I
Yeah,
would say that that's one of the things I learned about leadership is that a lot of times sorry about that, a lot of times other people don't have leadership right. Okay.
yeah,
Whether it's world schooling your kids, and world school for us just meant as an entrepreneur, I really didn't see us fitting into the classroom model. I really wanted to make sure that my kids learned leadership skills, not just about, for instance, history or the Civil War, things that we could learn easily through Khan Academy or movies or documentaries. But, like we celebrated Martin Luther King Day every year. I had them write an essay just like they did in a classroom, but we might have been on a mountain in Colorado and then we're going to go on a hike and we're going to talk about Camp 14 in North Korea. We're going to talk about current history, the war, or whatever's going on, and not just something that's in a textbook that was written hundreds of years ago. Now, world school it doesn't work for everyone, right?
yeah,
It's one of those things where you have to be called to do it. I think like anything in life with leadership, and again, I learned that a lot of leaders have it wrong, like the example I gave about not being your child's friend. You can be their friend and still be a leader,
yeah,
just like you are at work. I think that even in the grown-up world, sometimes, like I had a leader that was shouting once, okay, shouting, and I said, if you continue, he was screaming at someone, and I said, your screaming doesn't get your point across
right.
any more just because you're louder. But he didn't even realize he was raising his voice, right? And I think a lot of times we have this idea of let's be dominant leaders over our kids. Let's be dominant because they need to know where we stand, right? And I think if you're good at communication and you work on your own leadership, you're going to
Right.
be able to communicate without hitting someone or without, now that's not a popular view because everyone parents differently,
Sure.
but parenting's about leadership.
I think, well, and I think strength and influence, because your kids will come to you, right? They see you as strong and you have influence with your kids, like a friendship, right? We'll use the word friend. It's very different than power and authority. And you got to choose. I'd say you have to choose a path. There's probably something a little bit in the middle. I think one of the greatest things seeing parents and as a parent that probably had the greatest impact with, like my son, was as he got older, we sat down. I'm very much like you, Tammy. My son and I were super close, but I apologized to him. I had been reflecting on just life in general. And whereas a parent, I had felt like I had failed, right? And I think for him, because we talked about that later as an adult for him, that level of humility.
Yes, so important. Even
Yeah.
if you don't think you have anything to apologize for, I did the same thing and I hope that it had a positive effect, but I did the same thing.
Yeah. Because, oh my gosh, for sure. And yeah, the power play, which by the way, very first leader mentor I ever had was when I was 19. I didn't realize this, but in conflict, we go into conflict the way we were surrounded by conflict as kids. And my sales team was 37 and older. I was 19.
Wow.
And they're just like at me. And I just start yelling and I'm na 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 na. And you should be surprised because clearly that's not the Tanya, Well, so afterward, Jeff, takes me aside and we're sitting there talking, goes, I'm curious why you were yelling. Have I told you this before?
No, it sounds
Oh,
interesting.
you're gonna like this anchor because I'm all about mantras. So I'm 19 years old. And I said, well, because they're stupid and they're being blah, 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 blah. And he, in such a great way, said, I can appreciate that. I similarly used to respond that way. Now I had a mentor that took me aside one time and he told me, Jeff, what is yelling accomplishing over just having the conversation? Well, and he responded very much like me. And his mentor told him, yelling is a sign of ignorance. It's what people do when they don't know what to say.
Wow. Wow.
And I mean, I might have yelled 5 times in my life, and it was because somebody was in imminent danger, right? Stepping out in the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to control
Wow.
something, control how you go at conflict. And
Yeah. But that took a lot of maturity to see the leadership traits in you at
yeah,
19 and to correct you because instead of just firing you. And that's another point. Don't just eliminate people. Leadership is about helping them grow. I mean, when I look back at some of the things that my leaders taught me in the corporate world, I mean, invaluable, but embarrassing, right? Ways that I have failed when
right.
I was 21, 22, 23. Yeah.
Yeah, we are called to help others for sure.
Mhm.
That's okay. We are coming to the end, Tammy. Which these could become a little close to home for you. You've shared how the loss of your father shaped you in ways few experiences can. How did that moment change your relationship with words, their absence, their weight, and their power, and influence the life you felt called to live?
Well, I really do have a heart for um, men, and I know that that was placed within me, a long time ago to see kind of their secret lives and the things they don't talk about.
Yeah,
But I also have a heart for suicide prevention. So, for instance, that's silently at the core of everything I do.
yeah,
And I do know that we're not responsible for that action and that sometimes you cannot prevent that if someone is just bent on it, right? If they've made that decision. But there's a lot of education around suicidal ideation and the thoughts that people have in their mind replaying over and over when things don't go right, when circumstances don't go right. Sometimes that's someone's first go-to, right? And with my father, he had blown up his life and he had lots of women and gotten 3 women pregnant and had financial troubles. And I think working with the homeless and showing my kids what would happen if you're homeless, could you still survive without money? If you blew up all your relationships, could you still survive? And seeing the homeless really puts it in perspective, right? Because a lot of those men did end up divorced, lost their kids, et cetera, spiraled down into depression, not always drug use, but depression, and then ended up in a homeless shelter. And that really kind of fuels my desire, whether you're homeless or you're a CEO, to just be able to kind of try to see the unseen in someone. Again, you can, it could be someone that you don't even like. And if you pour out their gifts, you could, if you know they're going through something and you just give them a positive word, it could change their whole countenance. It could take them from bitter and angry to happy and serving and on the right path, right? So it's just really one part of the process. Mhm.
The biggest thing I could say for the people watching, if something's on your heart, you're sitting with somebody and something's on your heart that has a positive intention, you have a responsibility to speak it out. Because ultimately, right, that's, I mean, if you're a believer, just as an example, and you've got the Holy Spirit in you, and you're having a conversation with somebody and it just keeps, something just keeps coming up. We talked about this last time when you're like the matchmaker, not meant to be a matchmaker, but you've matchmade more people than I can count.
Yes.
Because something, you're sitting there having a conversation, out of the blue,
And I'll
something
hear.
else comes up. Yes.
I
And you
will
had the
literally
courage.
hear a name. Yes. And it takes a while to have that courage, to your point, have that courage to say
Yeah.
whatever you hear, even if it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have to make sense to you, it might be something that you need to pass on. Maybe you're the messenger.
Yeah.
You know, you need to pass that on to someone.
So that's my biggest challenge for people as far as how we're with words. If you're sitting with somebody and something hits you and it has a positive intention, or even if it's random, like Tammy was saying, you need to speak it out because you never know. You might be
Yes.
exactly that vehicle. All right, we're going to go with the last question, which is going to be about legacy. When you look at the life you've lived and the spaces you've stewarded, what feels most important to protect as you think about the legacy you're leaving behind?
I think for everyone, it's not working your whole life to build up dollars in your bank account.
Yeah.
Protect your peace, not just your loved ones, but protect your peace and your calling. If you know you have a calling in this world, go live it. Go
Yeah.
live it, no matter what.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for coming on with us again.
Thank you.
And what parting words do you have for people that are tuning in? Since what we do is we talk to builders, and you certainly are a builder of people.
Mhm. Pass this on and just, if you're unhappy wherever you are, make a change. Make
Yeah.
a change. Take a personal retreat, make a change. Send this podcast to someone who needs it because Tanya is building every day, building lives. Thank you, Tanya. It's been great.
Thank you. And we will see everyone else next week.